My name is John. I'm 28 years old. I have been through many things in my life. Some are good and some are bad, but everything has taught me a lesson. I grew up in a small town with my mother and younger sister. My father left us when I was 10 years old. He never came back. My mother worked hard to take care of us. She sold fruits by the roadside and sometimes cleaned people's houses. She was always tired, but she never complained. She would come home late at night, sit down on a wooden chair, and rub her tired feet. Even when she was exhausted, she would smile at us and ask if we had eaten. I could see the pain in her eyes, but she never let it break her. One day she fell sick. At first, she thought it was just tiredness, but it got worse. She could no longer go to work. We had no money for the hospital. I was just 15 years old, but I knew I had to do something. I started working at a construction site after school. It was very hard, but I had no choice. My hands had blisters, my back hurt, and sometimes I wanted to cry, but I kept going. I gave all the money to my mother for her medicine. It was not enough to take her to a good hospital, but at least she could buy some drugs. My mother always told me to focus on my education, but I knew that without money, there was no future for me. When I finished secondary school, I wanted to go to university, but there was no money for it. A friend introduced me to a man who promised me a job in another city. He said I could make a lot of money in a short time. I was excited. I thought my problems were over. I left home without telling my mother. I thought I would return with enough money to change her life. When I reached the city, I realized it was all a lie. There was no job. The man took my money and disappeared. I had nowhere to sleep. I begged on the streets for food. Some days I would go without eating. My clothes became dirty, and I smelled bad. People looked at me with disgust. I wanted to go back home, but I was ashamed. I had left with big dreams and returned with nothing. One night I met a group of young men. They told me they could help me make money, but I had to do something illegal. I was hungry and desperate, so I agreed. We started stealing from people. At first I felt guilty, but I told myself I had no choice. I needed money to survive. It started with small things, snatching wallets and phones. But as time went on, we started doing bigger things. One night we planned to rob a shop. Everything went wrong. The police came and we ran. They caught me. I was taken to prison. I cried. I thought about my mother and sister. I felt ashamed. I thought my life was over. I stayed in prison for 2 years. It was the worst time of my life. The first few weeks were the hardest. I was always scared. I saw people fighting. I saw people getting beaten. At night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about my mother and sister. I wondered if they were okay. I wondered if my mother was still sick. I regretted everything. I wished I had listened to her. In prison I met an old man. His name was Mr. Samuel. He was kind to me. He told me, "John, you made a mistake, but your life is not over. Learn from this. Change your ways." He taught me how to read books and think about life. He told me that no matter how bad the past was, I could still build a better future. When I came out of prison, I went back home. My mother was older and weaker, but she hugged me and forgave me. She cried when she saw me. I cried too. I promised her I would never go back to crime. I started looking for work, but nobody wanted to hire a man who had been in prison. People looked at me with suspicion. They thought I was still a thief. I felt hopeless again. One day, I walked into a small restaurant and asked for a job. The owner, Mr. David, looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Come tomorrow and start as a cleaner." I was happy. The pay was little, but I was happy to have a job. I worked hard every day. I cleaned the floors, washed the plates, and did everything with all my strength. Mr. David noticed my hard work. One day, he called me and said, "John, do you want to learn how to cook?" I said yes. He started teaching me. After a few years, I became a chef. I saved some money and opened my own small food stand. People loved my food. My business grew and I opened a restaurant. I employed young boys who were once like me, lost and hopeless. I taught them to work hard and stay away from crime. I told them my story and how I almost destroyed my life. Now I am 28 years old. I have a good business. I take care of my mother and sister. I also help young people who are struggling. I learned many lessons in life. I learned that easy money will always bring trouble. I learned that crime is never the answer. I learned that hard work may be slow, but it will give you a better future. I learned that everyone makes mistakes, but we can always change if we decide to. As my business grew, more people started coming to my restaurant. Some came for the food, while others came just to listen to my story. I never hid my past because I believed it could help others. Many young boys in my area were going through the same struggles I had faced. Some had no fathers, some had no jobs, and some were already getting involved in crime. One evening, a boy named Daniel came to my restaurant. He looked dirty and hungry. He asked if I could give him food, and I did. After eating, he sat quietly in a corner, looking around. I went to him and asked, "What's your story?" At first, he didn't want to talk, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. After some time, he told me that he had run away from home. His father was a drunk who beat him and his mother. His mother had died a year ago, and since then, life had been hard for him. He had dropped out of school and started stealing to survive. He told me he had just escaped from the police a few days ago and had nowhere to go. His story reminded me of myself. I told him my story too. I told him how crime had led me to prison and how hard it had been to change my life. I told him that if he continued on the same path, he would end up in a place worse than where he was now. Daniel sat quietly for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, "I don't want to go to prison." I smiled and told him, "Then you must change now." That night, I gave him a place to sleep in the small store behind my restaurant. The next morning, I asked him if he wanted to work. He said yes. I started training him just like Mr. David had trained me. At first, it was difficult. He had never worked before and sometimes he got frustrated. But I kept encouraging him. Slowly, he started changing. Months passed, and Daniel became one of my best workers. He even started saving money and talked about going back to school. Seeing him change made me realize that my past was not just a lesson for me, it was a lesson for others too. As time went on, more young boys came to me for help. Some were like Daniel, running from bad homes. Others had just come out of prison and didn't know where to start. I could not help everyone, but I tried my best. I employed those who were serious about changing their lives. I taught them how to cook, how to serve customers, and how to manage money. Some of them later left to start their own businesses. That made me happy. One day, an old man walked into my restaurant. I was busy in the kitchen, but when I came out, I almost dropped the plate in my hand. It was Mr. Samuel, the man I had met in prison. He had grown older, and his hair was now completely white, but his smile was the same. He looked at me and said, "I heard there is a man in this town who helps lost boys. I came to see for myself." Tears filled my eyes. I ran to him and hugged him. "I would not be here without you," I said. He sat down and I brought him food. As he ate, I told him everything that had happened since I left prison. He listened carefully, nodding as I spoke. When I finished, he smiled and said, "I always knew you had a good heart. You just needed the right path." That night I thought about my journey, from a hopeless boy on the streets to a prisoner, to a man who now helped others. Life had tested me in many ways, but I had survived. A few months later, I decided to do something bigger. I started visiting schools to talk to young boys about the dangers of crime and the importance of hard work. I shared my story, hoping to stop them from making the same mistakes I had made. Some listened, some did not. But even if I could save just one boy from going to prison, it was worth it. Now, at 28 years old, I wake up every morning with a purpose. My restaurant is doing well, my mother is healthier, and my sister has finished school. Daniel and many others like him now have a second chance at life. Looking back, I realized that every pain I went through had a purpose. If my father had not left, if my mother had not fallen sick, if I had never gone to prison, I would not be the man I am today. Sometimes, life takes us through dark paths, not to destroy us, but to make us strong. I learned that the past does not define a person. It is the choices we make today that shape our future. I am not perfect, and I still have struggles. But I wake up every day with a smile, knowing that I am no longer the lost boy I used to be. I am John, a man who found light in the darkest times, and I will continue helping others do the same.